You are live. Go ahead.
Well, hello. I'd like to welcome everyone out to the Magic System panel for the Story Valley Writing Conference. It's a pleasure to have everyone here. And to kind of get right into it, we'll start off with an introduction. My name is Parker. I am glad to be here and moderating this panel. I have learned a lot just by working with my panelists, which all have introduced themselves. Max, if you'd like to go first by introduction, and
Hello,
then
I'm Max, known professionally as MC Siegel. I'm both a writer of fiction and a research mathematician, having graduated in 2022 with a PhD in mathematics from the University of Southern California, with a specialization in analysis and number theory. When I'm not writing, I'm usually doing work researching the infamous Collatz conjecture. I've been writing seriously for over a decade, though it was only in the spring of 2023 that I've finally begun sharing my mature works with the public. Since 2018, I've been working on my biggest project to date, The Worms of Andalon. That's ampersand, A-L-O-N. The spelling is the way it is for certain legal reasons. Worms is an apocalyptic hospital medical science fantasy horror drama of cosmic proportions and is currently being serialized online on Royal Road. As a mathematician, I know that rules are actually incredibly unwieldy things. Rules and predictability, despite common perception, actually have no correlation with one another. Mathematics that I study is based entirely on rules, yet yields some of the most shocking, unexpected, and improbable discoveries. I'm constantly being reminded that what I don't know dwarfs the tiny island of information that I or anyone else knows, and that's what makes it wondrous for me. I bring the same ideas to my magic systems, and my interconnected web of stories gives me a whole multiverse of opportunities to explore.
sweet. Thank you, Max. Pleasure to meet you. Jesse, would you like to go next?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jesse Pullman, and I'm a science fiction and fantasy author from Long Island, New York. I got my start writing in chat room-based fantasy role-playing games, collaboratively creating characters, settings, and rules for fantastic effects like magic. I'm a recovering teacher with 8 years of service in the education field, and I have a BA in English and Social Studies, as well as an MA in secondary education. If you see my cat here, you can probably see her at the bottom of my screen. She will be catting around, so just be prepared for that. She is sitting on top of the notes that I would be taking for my fellow panelists, so I would have something to respond to. So do forgive me for not having recovering teacher that tracks. Thank you, Orlando. Yeah. And, that's it. As far as my prior publications go, I have a bunch, but the one I'm going to be talking about the most is the Pillars of the Kingdom trilogy, also known sometimes as Tales of Amour. It's an epic fantasy-style story with magical technology, cool sword fights, a little drama, a little betrayal, all those sort of fun things that hopefully bring readers into a crazy adventure where people with swords chop down giant battle mechs and throw magic around and save the world from all sorts of divine and not divine threats. I'm very thrilled to be here. This is the first Story Valley Con, and it's going to be a great one.
Well, thank you. Pleasure to meet you as well, Jesse. Would you like to go next, Steve?
Oh boy. All right. Hi, I'm Steve. My Discord name is Steve, Mysterious Loaf of Bread. I have 8 years of experience as a DM for Dungeons and Dragons. My current project is a text adventure called Echoes of Solitude. And I'll be talking about how to write this, how the story, the characters, and some of the game mechanics affect one another. Echoes of Solitude is a single player text adventure about the relationship between Rowan and Florence and how their issues are manifested through a mysterious island that lures them to it. The core problem is about acceptance, how both Rowan and Florence see themselves in the world and what they mean to each other and how they can proceed on their own or together.
Pleasure to meet you, Steve. Thank you. And then I have the honor to read Fane's introduction for her. It would be an absolute pleasure of mine. Hi, my name is Fane. I am a mute disabled adult who enjoys writing. I have been writing since I was 6 years old, but have never sought out publication. I mostly write for fun. Over the years, I've developed a number of magic systems to use in various stories, games, and especially for use with the hero system. It is like D&D but more open-ended. My passion with magic is a blend between technology and magic. They were a aircraft maintenance engineer before their accident. My apologies. I absolutely love elemental style because of its connection with the natural world. I have 2 cats who are my pride and joy, my fur babies, Ziggy and Oliver, and I have a farm with lots of small animals. So animals and nature are a huge part of my life and tend to imprint onto my magic systems and influence how I view and build magic systems. I'm also a fan of post-apocalyptic, and dystopian and sci-fi, so blending magic and these themes is very fun. I love to spend my days playing with Lego, writing and reading stories, and working the farm. I have been to a number of conferences and writing workshops throughout my life and see myself as a lifelong student. I love to share what I know and teach others. For me, it's very rewarding to watch those around me grow their craft and unique style. I have won a number of writing awards and contests in high school and university, and my love of writing has stayed with me throughout everything that's happened, all the ups and downs of life. So it's a pleasure to know that about Fane. But now I will start off everything by asking a question, and each of the panelists will be giving us an answer. So for question 1, when building your own magic system, tell us a bit about how you decided how magic worked and how you used it as a tool to shape the story. If you would like to lead us with that, Max.
So both as a writer and as a reader and just general media consumer, I'm inexorably drawn toward tales of wonder. I love the Star Trek ethos of confronting the unknown and coming away with discovery and broader horizons. So when it comes to stories, I tend to come up with the ending first. World building and magic building help me come up with the cool moments and awesome reveals that help my stories and novels take shape, both for my own writing process and for the reader's enjoyment. For Worms, my current story, early on, I made the decision to take a single ability, kinesis, the ability to physically move objects at a distance, from my oldest and deepest system, and then use that as the main system for the story. In the story's latter volumes, it's in 4 parts, I start showing more branches of the system, but I never explore any of them as deeply as I do kinesis. I wanted to do this for several reasons. For all intents and purposes, Worms' setting has no magic in it prior to the start of the story. As a result, one of the story's main motifs is how people with modern scientific knowledge would make sense of and react to the sudden emergence of magic. By focusing primarily on kinesis, I could more easily blend the lines between science and magic, while also allowing room for additional powers that don't quite fit under the umbrella. This creates a sense that there's much more going on that meets the eye, and there is. Aside from this background system, there are also the systems that I developed for the story's sake on its own. One of the most important of these is the titular Worms' ability to create worlds inside their minds. Though I'd always had that idea in mind, it was only while struggling to make some exposition come across more smoothly that I figured out what would now eventually become a critical and central component of my story. The main character, a neuropsychiatrist, uses this mind world ability of his to walk through the memories of the souls of the dead and give them comfort. He can have different souls share each other's experiences, which is how he uses psychiatric know-how to get quarreling characters to set aside their differences. My original plan was to have the souls simply narrate their experiences, but allowing Jeneth, the protagonist, and thus the reader to experience them for themselves made things so much more compelling. Most importantly, it gave Jeneth a way to make meaningful progress, achieving goals and growing as a character, something the story very much needed. Also, these abilities aren't given to Jeneth fully formed. Rather, he has to train with them to develop his skill, and in using them, he discovers new applications, implications, or connections, all of which serve to add to both the story's stakes and its sense of wonder, while leaving the reader with the correct impression that we've only scratched the surface of what's possible. It's also worth mentioning that my stories all exist in the interconnected multiverse, and that Worms is meant to be my reader's first experience of this multiverse. And to that end, it introduces lots of ideas on the side that I plan to concentrate on in other works.
Thank you. Jesse, would you go next?
Sure. So I guess I should start off with two of my big influences. The first of those being Mercedes Lackey's Valdemar magic system, where life energy is an essential part of how magic works, and life energy comes from all living things. And then the concept of ki taken from the Dragon Ball universe, which is very similar, even if it's underexplained within the Dragon Ball universe. I love the idea of powers coming from the soul of the individual wielding them. Power is earned, retained, and increased through training and discipline and focus. I want to add to something Max said, because when he talks about modern science connecting with magic, that brings me to a third of my big influences, which is Shadowrun. It's a role-playing system where magic just comes back one day, and maybe has always been there, and technology just has to kind of catch up and figure out everything, and MIT becomes MIT and M, the Institute of Technology and Magic. So it's pretty cool. Anyway, so this question is all about how I built my own magic system. And in my Pillars of the Kingdom novels, there are three main legs to the magic system. The first is that harnessing of spiritual energy that works most easily within a person's body. Most people who have some kind of power, they can increase their speed, their durability, their strength, and other attributes. They can throw bursts of energy out if they need to, but that's very draining. And those who are truly powerful can, using little more than a sword, counteract an entire army of technological or magical monstrosities. There's a second category of people, though. They're called arcanics. They simply have a knack for expressing that power, that same kind of spiritual life energy that's within the core of your soul, outside of their body. They can create a fireball. They can create a lightning storm. They can do it at will. They can do ritualistic magic, more complicated things, more in-depth things, more like a traditional mage might. It's the same source of power, but it's expressed differently. And you might be, I'm sorry, I'm a little lost in my notes here. The third leg of this technology, the third leg of this magic system comes from technology. Instead of pure science, technology is largely based on magic. In particular, the world that the characters live in is inhabited by all sorts of monsters. And as sort of a quick plug, Story Valley recently published an anthology called Fire and Scales. And I'm lucky enough to have a short story in it where the protagonists fight a dragon. That's right, Story Valley published an anthology. So you're wondering how monsters relate to this technology. When monsters die, they decompose and leave behind crystals that contain magical power. For example, a lightning elemental will leave behind a yellow crystal that is charged with electricity. That crystal gets plugged into a power plant, which in turn fuels the technology of most of the world's inhabitants. Do you need air conditioning? Get some blue crystal. It'll help contain temperatures. The last aspect of the magic system also helps with world building, because monsters, be it from the hunting/harvesting of them to the defense of civilians against them, is a huge motivator for why certain characters do what they do. They are major, sometimes entirely random dangers, since a monster can appear from seemingly nowhere to attack a settlement, but they also fuel the global economy, as my cat tries to crawl into my lap while I have a, clipboard in it. So anyway, in the Kingdom of War, the principal setting for the series, you've got all sorts of knights and heroes running around the realm, not just protecting it from outside forces and not just policing its people, but actively taking up the swords to defend civilians against monsters that just suddenly appear. The government even has entire accounting systems dedicated to making sure that each contributor gets a cash share proportional to the value of the crystal they bring in by killing monsters. And that's my magic system. Oh, T-Berry asked what story. It's in there. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, though. Isn't that funny?
I have a story in that anthology as well. It's on the internet. Nobody knows you're a dragon.
Ooh.
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating. Well, you guys better check out that anthology. I will hopefully be able to get myself a copy here as well.
My story takes place on the moon.
Neat.
Ooh,
Steve,
nice.
would you like to share with us your answer?
Yeah. This is we're still the first question, right?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So for Echoes of Solitude, the magic system is inspired by both Western and Eastern religions and iconography, along with my own additions that bring cohesion for the reader, so they can learn how to defeat each type of enemy. The key factors are the reader's deduction skills and context clues given to them. Each enemy has a specific strategy where the reader is successful in defeating the enemy or a partial strategy, meaning that the reader only damages the supernatural entity, but it lives still. There are various types of different rituals and prayers, but the requirements to perform them are specific to that type of ritual, where it could be a specific number of items, specific items in general, or even a prayer read from a scroll or a book of some kind in order to help banish or detain or eradicate whatever demons or supernatural entities. And then with that, there's also a multitude of different types of weapons and items that can help with defending from these enemies. They could be have magical properties, or they themselves are magical. So that's it. That's all.
Thank you, Steve. Shane, would you like to show us your answer?
Mhm.
For those of those with questions, we should have her screen shared, and we will be reading what her answer is to her question. If you guys have any issues seeing it,
I can read it.
oh yeah,
I got it.
Some people just wasn't sure what was going on in the chat, so I'm just addressing it.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, cat. Time to get relocated. You're getting bitey. Say goodbye.
Damn, it's pretty exhausting. Pretty exhaustive. Yay, plotters unite.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
Well, thank you, Fane. Moving on to question number 2.
Mm-hmm.
How can you incorporate magic into a futuristic universe, and how would it work with technology? Would it eradicate technology or make it obsolete? How would the cost of magic affect the outcome of that? How does technology and techno magic blend?
Okay, I'll start. So, oh man, you asked just the right person for this. And just to be clear, the term is magitech. Technomagic is magic that affects and involves non-magical technology, whereas magitech is magic as technology.
Hmm.
Anyhow, because my stories are all set in the same multiverse, I can bring as much magic and or technology as I want into play. In my oldest system, because magic acts both as an and in terms of an extension of existing physical laws of nature, there are certain feats that, while possible in theory, are basically impossible for any ordinary magic user to do. And the classic example of this is shapeshifting and polymorphing. Turning a goose into a cat is a simple matter of rearranging the cells and molecules of the goose from goose shape to cat shape. However, since there are a lot of cells and molecules in both a goose and a cat, any human who tries to do this will end up with a horrific bloody mess on their hands. However, once supercomputers come around, it's very easy. Have the computer cast the spell. Unlike the human, the supercomputer has the processing power to keep track of all of those different molecules. Now, technology and genetic engineering are good for mild to moderate changes, say growing gills or changing gender. But if you want to make yourself into a centaur, for example, you can either do it through magic or by growing a centaur body in a vat and then transferring your consciousness from your current body into the centaur body. But that's especially if you want to do it for long term. For me, the blend of magic and tech really depends on the setting. I grew up being enchanted by Madeleine L'Engle's Wrinkle in Time, and especially its sequel, A Wind at the Door, not to mention the works of Lovecraft. As a result, in my imagination, I see advanced science and advanced magic as two sides of the same coin. In my multiverse, there's an ancient, long-lost civilization that leaves behind artifacts of stupendous power, like the kind of thing that can erase time or create entire new realities all at once. Is it magic? Is it science? The answer is yes to both. There are levels in my world building where the uncertainty principle, as it manifests in the theory of Fourier analysis, is an integral part of constructing portals between universes, or where space-time itself gets harvested and refined for specialized use. At these heights, the distinction between magic and technology really just evaporates. In some of my settings, I might use the principles behind a magic system to justify, say, faster than light travel by spaceships, only I never explain the connection to the magic in the story, nor do the characters themselves ever suspect it. In my first novel, the setting was in the middle of an industrial a technological industrial revolution that occurred several centuries after a magical industrial revolution. The advantages and disadvantages of both methods form an important part of a setting's societal milieu, because several centuries beforehand, the magical industrial revolution led to the setting's World War II. It's literally their second World War, and it wreaked massive destruction. And that led to a great deal of political and societal upheaval and controversy. So things are still controversial even today. Because I enjoy doing world building for its own sake, and because I like taking a naturalistic approach, meaning that I like to have things develop and change over time as they naturally would, unless there is someone or something that's explicitly intervening to stop it. Because of this, the relationship between magic and technology, as I said before, really depends on the setting. If you have a setting of galactic proportions or greater, as long as magic is a more efficient form of long-distance transportation, then some scientific more efficient than some scientific mumbo jumbo, societies will use the magical method, provided there aren't extenuating circumstances that justify things happening otherwise. Technology, after all, is just the result of human ingenuity acting on the rule set and resources provided by nature. Unless there's something that prevents people from using that rule set or its resources, I think it's reasonable to expect that magic and or technology will both develop in analogous ways in whatever setting you happen to have. And if you spend some time figuring out how the two interact and relate, it can lead to wonderful outcomes in the long term. Personally, I'm endlessly fascinated by details of this sort and enjoy it when writers explore them, rather than, say, do what Adrian Tchaikovsky did in his Shadows of the App series, where he makes people have to choose between either being able to use magic or being able to use technology. And once you do one, you can't do the other. Like, one of the things is that wizards have difficulty opening doors because doors are sufficiently technological that they're opposed to magic. Stuff like that strikes me as artificial and quite a bit silly, if you ask me. And I tend to avoid that kind of carte blanche suspension of disbelief in my stories.
Thank you. Jesse, would you like to go?
So I want to start by drawing on what everyone else has said already, because I think it's essential. This is a great question. It's very multi-layered, and it takes technology and magic and puts them together, right? So it takes the rituals and prayers that Steve was talking about that bring to mind the traditional idea of someone evoking magic, weaving their hands and whispering words. It takes what Fane said about the way magic relates to the characters, especially things like ethics and legality, because if you're building technology with magic, you're going to get laws about the way that's built. And I love what Max said about magic as an extension of natural laws, because that's kind of where I'm going with what I have to say about this. We already talked about how monsters, magic, and technology are intertwined within my novels. An example of this functioning on a fairly grand scale is the self-styled Empire of Salas, an island nation with hostile intentions towards our protagonists. It's a megacity located on an island in the ocean, and it relies on blue crystal harvested from sea monsters to source fresh water, as well as to sanitize the water they've already used. They're utterly dependent upon hunting monsters to get water in the ocean. Salas, and to a lesser extent our protagonists in the Kingdom of Amor, all have all sorts of physics-defying technology. A staple of the series is the Regalia, which is an airship held aloft through gravity-breaking technology that carries our heroes all over the place. There's also things like plasma rifles, which are powered by red crystal, which is fire-aligned. But a lot of times the average soldier isn't getting the best crystal, they're getting low-quality stuff, meaning their weapons are relatively weak compared to something that maybe a noble person or an elite unit might get. There's also other applications. You don't have to use red crystal. You can use blue crystal to get a nice right. But I want to look outside of my own systems. I want to talk about Warhammer 40,000. Sometimes shorthanded Warhammer 40K, sometimes just called 40K. Warhammer's most famous tagline is, "In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war." And yes, it's a highly dystopian setting, but I want to decouple its dystopian themes from its technology just a little bit and talk about how I kind of envision aspects of its world developing as it happened. Humanity lives here on planet Earth, known in universe as Holy Terra, and it goes to great lengths to develop all sorts of science, right? Our understanding of physics becomes so great that we discover a parallel dimension within which we can send starships across the galaxy at faster than light speeds. This dimension is known as the warp. and it's extremely dangerous. Bad things happen to those who travel through it, ranging from insanity to mutilation and beyond, at least until a new technology called Geller field is invented to adequately shield starships. Then it's safe to travel through the warp, right? Unless you wind up in the wrong place or the wrong time, but that's another story, and that's not the worst of it. See, humanity begins to express a sort of psychic gene, leading to people known as psychers who can do all sorts of magic with their minds. Cool, right? Except it turns out they're tapping into the power of the warp to rearrange physical space. And then it's discovered that the warp actually responds to emotions, be it human or alien. In fact, the things that people believe in can become real. Doubly, in fact, it's eventually discovered that significantly large enough pools of emotional resonance can be highly destructive. Triply, in fact, such forces can even be creative, like when the alien Eldari race spent centuries of decadent debauchery that devolves to the point that their psychic energies manifested an intelligence, an evil intelligence, one that consumed a vast percentage of the Eldari's very souls. The point I hope you take away from this narrative, and it's a summation, there's far more to it than that. They've got like 100 books in this series, and that's just the lore, that's not the miniature game, is that what began as technical research, early probes into the warp, Geller fields, shields, etc., culminated in psychic phenomenon that simultaneously correspond to and yet defy the physical plane. Put another way, research into science unlocked the knowledge of what is tantamount to magic, which obeys in response to some physical and logical inputs and rules, but not others. Some within the 40K universe think that more research may bring about more understanding and thus control over the metaphysical. Others believe that more research is exactly how to get one of those evil intelligences I mentioned to look square at you with malicious intent. That's not to say 40K only has magic as science. There's plenty of science involved. Stay with members of the Adeptus Mechanicus, swapping out biological organs for cybernetic ones. But even as they approach science, they approach it with a sort of mysticism because science has always proven to them to be a little bit mystical. And I think that's a fun thing about science, is it's a little bit mysterious.
Thank you. And Steve, would you like to go next? Are you still with us, Steve?
Yep, I'm here. All right. All right. So, for question 2, this all depends on the type of story that you want to create. Do you want the magic to be called something that's based in science, such as nanomachines, or would it be some kind of like implant that would enhance people's minds or bodies for superhuman powers, or something like telekinesis or telekinetic sorts of things, abilities? Or would you want to have like the technology be the source of the magic? So whenever a character references to be anything that's scientific, it would also mean something that is magical. Magic and science could also destroy each other if you wanted to have it, or they could work together in some way. Either one way is not better than the other. It really depends on the type of like story you want to create. Maybe magic comes back from the universe every couple billions of years and disappears after a certain point in time, just like recurs every billion years. Or maybe there was an advanced ancient civilization that had control over the universe, then disappeared suddenly. So maybe there's remnants of their civilization, different planets, or just floating through space. Or maybe there's something that affected how the color of different planets, or how different solar systems work. There's a bunch of different examples and how you can go about it. Maybe there's even their descendants are few and far between that your characters can encounter, and then either work with them or without them in order to figure out what happens to that ancient civilization.
Cool, thank you, Steve. Then Thane, would you like to show us what your answer is for question 2? If everyone can look at her shared screen, we can see what she's typing.
Mhm. I love questions too.
Speaking of things I love, to go back a bit, I love Lego too.
Mhm. Yep. Mhm. I might add to that, there's also the limitation, not just as to the cost of magic, but as to what magic can accomplish. If magic can't teleport you, for instance, then that could be a place where technology could come into play, or vice versa. Mm. Yep.
I'm
Mhm.
always wary about those technological transporters because a lot of times they break you down on the atomic level and rebuild you up somewhere else, and in a sense, you kind of just died.
No,
So
it's murder. It's murder.
I'd rather walk through a gateway between space. I don't know. It's just me.
That's actually an excellent basis for just a particular group of people. They don't want to use a teleporter technology because they believe it's death, and they're not wrong.
Ross said, I've seen the fly." Yeah.
No, no, not that, but the fact that technically the you that emerges is not the same you that entered. Your consciousness ceases to exist. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Believability is important. Mhm. 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 world builders unite.
Oh, sweet. Well, thank you for that input, Fane. Excuse me. Awesome. Well, due to time, we'll keep the questions rolling along to make sure we get a chance to go through all of them. So for question number 3, how do you decide as an author how much of your magic requires an explanation for your reader? What do you lay out like an encyclopedia, and what do you leave in mystery?
Well, this is obviously a really important question. Oftentimes, I find that people tend to treat explanations as binaries. Either you give them or you don't. But in truth, I think it's more subtle than that. I think we can divide magic and magic systems into 4 components: effects, concepts, rules, and processes. The effects are what the magic does. The concepts are the various components of the system that you generally need to come up with names for. Everything from spells and chakras to soul webs or the spice melange. The rules are, well, the rules, and the processes are the things that people do to use magic. In my experience, effects and processes are the easiest aspects of magic to describe and explain. This is because explaining them can almost always be made to serve story, plot, theme, or character. Even if we don't get an explanation of the detailed rules governing when and how a wizard can launch a fireball, a description of the process of the wizard conjuring the fireball is going to fit right into a scene where a wizard is, well, conjuring a fireball or in a battle. Likewise, if you're writing about a character who's performing the ritual to become a vampire, there's a huge amount that you can show or tell just with the process and the effects. Maybe the character is seeking vampirism because they want to live longer and have no qualms about feeding on the blood or soul energy or what have you of other people in order to make that possible. Basically, by showing your magic being used, you get to explain things for free. Concepts and rules, on the other hand, I think they require more care, and for a very simple reason. They're abstract. For rules and limitations, for example, unless one character is quite literally being lectured by another character, or perhaps reading some reference book, it's almost always a better idea to piggyback explanations of concepts and rules on top of demonstrations thereof. Although Brandon Sanderson can sometimes get bogged down in his self-explorations of his own magic systems, part of the reason why his action sequences are so satisfying is because he's the master when it comes to showing his magic system's rules in action. Instead of being a dry line in a textbook, the rule is the principle by which a character gets away with a feat of badassery. When rules can be implied through, while rules can be implied through demonstrations, concepts, though, are a bit more difficult to handle. Yes, you can suggest the properties of a thing by context, but sometimes you just need to get out there and say what's what. This can be especially satisfying if it's done after the concept in question has been introduced, though not necessarily explained, or if the explanation is given in a context where it is directly relevant. Finally, when it comes to my own writing, I tend to prioritize explaining effects and processes. I'll generally explain them right as they happen, whereas explicit explanations of rules and concepts filter in a bit more slowly, unless it affects the ability of the reader to understand what's going on. For me, writing is pretty much the reverse of reading. When I read a story I love, I experience it as a glorious mind movie in my head. Likewise, when I write, I conjure a mind movie in my head and then transcribe it onto the page. Beyond everything else, I see my most basic goal as a writer is to make sure that each and every scene I write is easily visualized and understood by my reader. If my point of view character sees and understands something, I want my readers to see and understand it too. I'll explain whatever is necessary to reach that standard. And for everything after that, though, I play it by ear.
Thank you. Jesse, would you like to go next?
All right, so I know we're running a little short on time, so I'll try to condense things a bit. And I believe Max mentioned Brandon Sanderson. He's the guy who is most known for, well, not most known for, but definitely known for setting up the traditional definition of a hard versus soft magic system. In other words, a hard one has often strict rules known to the reader. A soft magic system has often flexible rules that are not necessarily known to the reader. And in Sanderson's definition, a lot of it is reader-facing. In other words, does the reader know or not know? That's hard versus soft. We usually think when we're writing, a hard system has a lot of rules and strictures, like Max said, a process. But for a soft system, it's much more flexible and open. As far as laying out what the reader knows, I tend to go from the perspective of the characters as much as the readers. It's true that the characters will almost certainly know more about the way the world works than the readers do, but it's essential for the reader to have some understanding of the process the characters go through in order to access their powers, right? So one of the best tips I can give for that is to give a clear example. The one I like is often seen in shonen manga like Yoshihiro Togashi's Hunter x Hunter, where we see how the protagonists go through a whole training arc where they learn the fundamentals of how their world's magic system, called Nen, works. They get the basics, they learn some cool tricks, but over the course of the story, we discover new things and adapt their powers. This is a benefit on two levels, and they're both benefits to the reader and to the author. First, it lets the reader discover the magic the same way the characters do. Second, it gives the author some leeway to reveal only what they choose to, and oftentimes that falls to what they've thought of so far. So a common thing I see, especially in Hunter x Hunter, is why didn't character A use power B to do thing C? And a lot of times the answer is just that the author hadn't invented power B yet. So in Hunter x Hunter, they use the theoretical excuse that there's a character who recognizes the technique that he could never have seen before because he hadn't been trained yet and never had a chance to see it. And the answer is, well, magic needles suppressed his power. He forgot. Now he knows. And that works, I guess. It's a continuity tweak to fix a plot hole. But as far as a plausible explanation, it works. And it just gives the reader a little insight into how the world works.
Thank you. Steve, would you like to go?
Yeah. So the Echoes of Solitude magic system relies on all three factors in order to give a sense of hope to both characters and the reader. I have it so there's enough information that can be described to the reader in order to gain context clues, and also characters will have enough knowledge, like rudimentary knowledge, roughly for your average reader, in order for them to help the reader through how they can defeat various enemies. So, for instance, Florence or Rowan can either could use would have their inner voice. I'll describe Rowan's or Florence's inner voice in a way that can help lead the player or the reader to understand how to defeat said enemies. So that can help with bringing the reader into understanding how the system works and also how to progress. Like I said earlier, there could be even there's room for partial successes. So even if the reader doesn't even guess correctly, they can still at least make some kind of progress. So it's never just black and white. There's shades of gray throughout. There's also areas or rooms where there could be other people. There are other people who have tried to do different rituals and prayers where it can show the reader how a ritual is done, how a ritual is done correctly and incorrectly. Like, for example, if there's a salt circle and it's not complete, it would look like something pushed the salt out of the way, misaligning the protective barrier. Therefore, the reader can infer that there is that could be one reason why the ritual didn't work. Perhaps later on they could find out that maybe the materials that the person who was using for the ritual wasn't strong enough in some way. Either maybe it was half a required material or it was broken in some way. You know, that's yeah, that's it. I'm good.
Thank you, Steve. All right, Fane, let's see your answer.
No.
Mhm.
And just so everyone knows, all of this document will be saved, and you should all will have access to it, and to be able to read everything into a more leisure time setting on your own.
Mhm.
All right. Well, thank you, Fane. So for our last questions, we'll have 10 minutes to get through this. How does the cost of magic affect the plot of your story? Why is this an important question to ask yourself? Why is the cost of magic so important, and how can you use that cost to develop stronger characters and a stronger plot? How can asking these kinds of questions help you develop a magic system?
In worms, other than having to be slowly transformed into a magical fungal lindworm in order to be able to use his kinesis powers, the main cost that Jeneth deals with in my story is hunger. The transformation, for conservation of mass reasons, is fueled by how often he eats and how much. Using too much of his psychokinetic abilities exacerbates his hunger, which forces him to eat and thereby advances transformation. This is important because he spends the majority of the story trying to delay and stretch out his transformation for as long as possible. In general, I tend to be rather opportunistic with my ideas, particularly when it comes to implementing costs for magic. Instead of, although it's not out of the questions, in general, rather than starting with an idea for a cost, I usually end up devising one as a result of figuring out the details of my ideas, often as part of adding speed bumps to keep characters from becoming overpowered. For example, the use of food and hunger in worms arose for two reasons. One, the story required some justification for why Jeneth didn't transform as quickly as other characters did. And two, as I said before, I realized I was violating conservation of matter. And when you care about that, like I do, it's an important thing. The worms are pretty big and they need raw material to get to that size. Personally, I'm not one to obsess about magic always having a highly specific cost. I'm fine with generic stamina or energy level requirements. However, because I tend to come up with my ideas for settings and endings before I figure out my characters and their plots, most of my costs arise either because I intentionally wanted them present from the get-go or because I end up needing to have costs for the sake of the narrative. As an example, at the moment, I'm developing a Full Metal Alchemist-like magic system based on capital L, love. One gains abilities by sacrificing things using a magic circle. There's a bit of haggling involved with the forces of the universe, though. What you can get for your sacrifice is determined by how much love was poured into the sacrifice. For example, if you sacrifice the feathers of a bird and some bones and the like, you can grow wings and fly for a short period of time. However, if you sacrifice a hawk that you raised from a hatchling and have known and cared for a decade or more, you'll gain the permanent ability to grow wings and fly whenever you want for however long you want. If you want to extend your lifespan, sacrificing your children, and the more you love them, and you, the more youth you can gain, and so on and so forth. I like this system, and that makes me want to tell a story with it. As for figuring out how to make a stronger plot with stronger characters, well, that's just starts with stronger consequences. That's just a matter of connecting the dots and letting all the consequences and implications crawl out of the woodwork. Jesse?
All right, so it's funny, Max, because I was actually going to talk a little bit about Full Metal Alchemist and the idea of equivalent exchange, and you went full berserk on me and started talking about sacrifices. Nice. Points to you. Yeah. So, basically, a lot of times, in order to keep characters from magicking themselves out of trouble, authors put costs on magic, right? there's a sacrifice that you have to go through of some sort. In my Pillars novels, it's primarily just personal exhaustion. You use up all your power, you're tired, you're vulnerable. There are little exceptions. If you use some kind of sacrifice, maybe say, and this is a little bit of a spoiler for the anthology, but if you maybe use blood as fuel for magical fire, you'll get a better result. You'll do more damage, you'll penetrate defenses, etc., etc. That falls back to me, in my experience, from Mercedes Lackey's magic system, because she treats magic as life energy, and characters who make some form of sacrifice get greater results. And this can be a really bad thing, because if an antagonist is sacrificing victims to bolster their power, well, how do the heroes counter that? They have to sacrifice maybe something of their own, maybe someone of their own, or maybe themselves. We already talked about equivalent exchange, so we're just going to skip that paragraph. We're going to talk about what Steve was talking about, which is spell components. Dungeons and Dragons and many other magic systems have spell components. Oh, you want to become invisible? You will need, for some reason, an eyelash enclosed in gum arabic. I guess that's supposed to symbolize eyes being held shut so no one can see you. But yeah, if you've got that, you say the right words, you've got the magic gestures, and you've got the right amount of juice left, boom, you've got a spell, you're invisible. So thinking back to the question, the ultimate goal of an author thinking about how to balance their magic system is to find a way to balance the impossible with the real, right? Magic is, outside of perhaps a theological context, a religious sense of things, impossible. I can't lift my hand and conjure a fireball. No amount of sacrifice is going to make that happen unless I use gasoline or alcohol and pour it in my hand and something physical makes insane fireball in my hand. Bad idea. Don't do that at home, kids. The trick, I think, is that as long as your rules make sense within their own context, you're fine. This is especially true if your magic system is relatively soft and the reader doesn't know a lot about how it works. But even in a hard magic system, you don't need to worry about sacrifices and costs so much as you simply need to make the magic work consistently and within its own context.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Go ahead, Steve.
All right. So, one of the core themes for Echoes of Solitude is sacrifice. The real cost of magic to the magic system, per Rowan of Florence, is the time, materials, and sanity with figuring out how the magic system works and their character arcs. Since by making some kind of decision, you're taking time, which then can affect how each of the characters can proceed throughout the story. There are two types of payoff that coexist with each other. Short term is based on survival aspects and knowledge, while long term is based on either character learning how to believe in themselves and strengthen to continue going forward for better or for worse. The magic system does depend on their ability to comprehend and understand how to use the rituals, prayers, items, and weapons. The characters must be why these questions are important. The characters must be able to experience conflict in some way when it comes to a story with a magic system that focuses. When it comes to a story with a magic system, the focus is often based around how the magic is used and how the characters grow with that magic. You need to be able to have characters that are dynamic, and a simple way to do that would be having their use of magic and or their knowledge of magic to become an option for them to use rather than just a feature.
Just in case you can't see the chat, Fane posted that these are the clip notes.
Again, full answers will be provided after this. There's been a lot of great information to have. And it's been a pleasure to work with Jesse, Max, Steve, and Fane. And hopefully you guys were all able to learn something new today. They've given me a real big insight of how I want to rework and do my magic system personally.
Any questions? Anybody?
There was a question earlier up by Ross. He says, in a world where magic and tech are intertwined, how far do I take it one way or the other? I find 40K leans further into tech. Might be a personal thing, but it rubs me the wrong way. Feels like explaining something that should remain mysterious.
I'd say that it's entirely a matter of your own personal preference. The one thing that, regardless of what you choose, whatever you do, make it consistent. If you're going to have a story where there's, for example, 1980s level tech, but more significantly advanced magic, then don't go around inserting nanobots or warp travel unless your entire story is somehow about the intrusion of nanobots and warp travel into what you're doing. One of the reasons, although I do personally think that the Warhammer universe, though very, very interesting, is a bit silly. One of the things that works with it is that it's themed incredibly well. The ideas, one of the recurring themes in Warhammer 40K is the idea that it's almost like Lovecraftian, that there's power that's too great, and by reaching for that power, you become the monster that you're trying to defeat. And so this goes everything from the warp and the way emotions interplay, even the societies themselves break down as they strive toward ideals, but inevitably fall short. So there's this notion of corruption and decay and madness that infuses it. And the lore as presented, I think it taps into that really well. And that's one of the reasons why it's so popular, because it creates its themed aesthetic and presents it so well. So as long as you can find that theme space for yourself and figure out what your boundaries are, I think you'll be good. It all comes back down to knowing thyself.
So yeah, one of the themes of 40K is like the eternal decay of the Imperium of mankind, right? Over the course of 10,000 years, the galaxy spanning empire of humanity has gotten worse and worse. And in recent years, it's gotten even worse with the Cicatrix Maledictum and the splitting of the galaxy into two and all that stuff, right? So within 40K, there exists a group called the Grey Knights. And the Grey Knights have in their possession a box. And it's a box that's pretty simple looking, but it contains a thing called the Terminus Decree. It's the Emperor of Mankind's final solution. I know that term is extremely loaded, but that's what this is, because we're talking about a galaxy where genocide is common. For the last-ditch thing to do. Hey, everything is gone. We are all going to die if you don't open this box. What's in the box? Well, I've heard they've done a story about what might be in the box. There's a theory about what's in the box. There's lots of theories, and those theories are what keep readers guessing and wanting to see more, right? The magic is unexplained. But you can only have that balance play for so long, where there's this magic thing, but we're not using it, and what does it do? We don't know. And eventually you got to just get down and either not use it for some reason or use it for some reason. The mystery is suspense, which is great, but suspense either needs to be met one way or another. Either we're not going to open the box, or the box is going to be destroyed. That's an option. Or the box is going to have something in it that maybe we don't know what to do with, or it might just be the first leg of the next quest. But the box exists, and it's Schrodinger's cat. There's something in the box. We don't know what's in it, if it's alive or dead, until we open the thing. And the suspense is great. The mystery is great. But if we don't resolve it, what's its purpose? Just to drag us along? I don't know, man. Like, I like my mysteries explained, but that's a personal decision. That's up to each and individual reader. And in Warhammer, it's the sort of thing you're not going to see answered for 50 years anyway. So I wouldn't worry too much about it.
Yeah. So I think that we should call this a wrap. Just because we're running short on time. I really enjoyed this. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all for coming. It was an absolute pleasure. Again, we'll have recordings available. We'll have full answers available. Jesse, Max, I don't know if you guys wrote out your questions full either.
I did.
But it would be awesome if we had a way or a resource to have these out to everyone.
Don't worry. I'll put it into the chat thread for the panel. I'll put it there. The message thread, not on the server, but then you can guys do it with
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Well, I gotta get going now. Again, ask questions in the Discord. We'd love to answer them. Bye.
Goodbye. Thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you guys so much for coming as well. It was a pleasure to have you guys, and well, I appreciate that. So I will also now end this recording. So thank you. Bye bye.
Pieces.